Okay, everyone, it is noon in the Eastern Time Zone of the United States, and it is time to get our webinar started. I'm very excited to have each of you join us today, and I'm particularly excited to have our presenter, who I'll introduce in a little bit, Kimberly Mentzell, with us today. She's a very, very busy woman, and I'm very pleased that she was able to take a few moments out of her day to join us today. She'll be talking about defending small business, addressing small business cyber needs in conjunction with affordability and resources, and a little bit more about her in just a little bit. Many of you are joining us after you've been involved with us for some time and have seen many of our webinars, will follow basically the same format as we've been following all through this year. I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction on capital in case we happen to have a guest who's not that familiar with us. Then some housekeeping. I'll introduce the presenter, and then we'll get right into the presentation. That will take the bulk of our time together. We'll allow some time toward the end of the presentation for a question and answer period, which will be done via the text chat. So make sure you have that enabled and ready to go to ask your questions. And then we'll cover how to get a copy of the recording and the slides and the certificate. And by the way, the session is being recorded today. Just a moment about capital. Again, looking over who has joined us today, I see some very familiar names. And so I know that many of you have a lot of familiarity with the organization, but there's always a few. We were established in 1927. And if you think about that, we were technology before technology was even a thing. I mean, we've been around for a long time, and almost 100 years now. We're one of the few private universities in the state of Maryland, and need I say, actually throughout the entire country, that really stays in a niche of STEM, engineering, cyber, computer sciences, and the management of technology, a very unique role that we have carved out for ourselves and done very successfully for a long time. We're nonprofit, private, and accredited. Each of those are potent words, but I always like to stop and talk about the word in red, the word accredited. There's so much confusion about what universities, how they're accredited, what kind of accreditation they have. And basically in the United States, the entire U.S. is broken into 6 regions, and it is regional accreditation that is the top accreditation that a university would strive for. You would think it would be national, but it's not. It's regional. And we are regionally accredited with the Middle States Commission on Higher Education. Other similar universities to us that would have the same kind of accreditation would be the University of Maryland, of course, University of Pennsylvania, and many other universities in our region. We're also approved by the state of Maryland to confer all of our degrees, all the way from our 2-year associate's degrees right up to all of our doctoral degrees. And this is not going to be a discussion about any of those, although I will mention at the very end, we do have information sessions dealing with both the graduate master's and the graduate doctoral degree programs, and we'd be happy to talk to you about those in a separate conversation. Here's some session pointers, just a tad of housekeeping. We'll answer questions at the conclusion of the presentation, but you can actually ask questions throughout. You could start asking questions from the moment our speaker begins to speak. We'll take just as many of those questions as we can. We're typically able to get through most of them. We're not enabling microphones and webcams for our presenters today, for the participants, definitely for the presenter, not for the participants. And so the text chat is the way that we want you to communicate with us. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to send a link to the recording and to the slides to all registrants. And many of you that watch it will time shift, and so you'll be watching it on demand, and we'll talk about how to get a participation certificate, whether you're available watching it right now live or whether you're viewing the recording later on. Now, with that, I want to get right into the presentation, Defending Small Business, Addressing Small Business Cyber Needs in Conjunction with Affordability and Resources. Let me talk just a little bit about our presenter, Kimberly Mentzell. Forgive me for reading this, but it's highly detailed, and you can follow along with the slide. Kimberly Mentzell is the Director of Cybersecurity and Aerospace for the Maryland Department of Commerce. She's also on the advisory board for Capital Technology University's Center for Women in Cyber, which is focused on empowering women of all ages to pursue careers in cyber and addresses the growing need for women professional in cyber-related fields. She's worked in technology for over 20 years as an educator and professional, and in cybersecurity, networking, Linux, and programming. She maintains several industry certifications and actively teaches at the collegiate level, both here at Capitol and at Frederick Community College. She serves as a member of the Maryland Security Council and co-chair of the Maryland Cyber Education Committee in conjunction with the Maryland Center for Computing Education Steering Committee. She's a member of the Computer Science Teachers Association, the Women in Cybersecurity, Cybersecurity Association of Maryland, Maryland Tech Council, Tech Frederick Advisory Board, and Ethical Hacking Council Advisory Board. And somehow she managed to find enough time to be with us today, which is kind of amazing. She actually holds a Master of Science in Cybersecurity from the University of Maryland, a Master of Science in Education from Frostburg State University, and an MA in Secondary Education from Notre Dame. I forgot to ask her if she's working on her PhD, but she very well might, for all I know. Maybe she'll address that. And she also has a bachelor's of business administration in accounting from Loyola University of Maryland. With that long introduction, I think it's time to hear from our presenter. So I'm going to give the floor now to Kimberly so that she can go ahead and begin her presentation.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that very long introduction. Every time I hear the list of all the things, I wonder myself how I have time to do things. But it's always a pleasure to go out and meet with everybody and to continue pursuing all of my education and interest in cybersecurity and technology in general. So thank you for that, Bill. I really do appreciate that. And of course, now I would be remiss if I didn't tell everybody, welcome to this webinar. And this webinar is very special today because I am presenting from HammerCon 2023, which is at Capitol Technology University. So I'm actually presenting from the university today. I know it's very quiet in here. I have my own room in here all to myself, in the dark, of course, being cybersecurity. We love to work in the dark. Not metaphorically, but physically. And so I had the pleasure of being here today. I know that it is very quiet in here, but actually the conference itself is crazy. It's rocking. There's a lot of networking going on, a lot of sharing, a lot of hugging, fist pumping, and a lot of wonderful speakers here today. So I'm very excited and very honored actually to be working in conjunction with Capitol Technology University on this very auspicious day. In addition, I also would like to give kudos to our our Center for Women in Cybersecurity. We are very excited to have launched that this past couple months. So that's in full swing, and it's an honor to be part of that as well. So let's get in and start talking about what the reason why you came here is to talk about small business and defending small business in terms of cybersecurity, in terms of helping them improve their security posture. So I'd like to go ahead and start off with the next slide. Hold on. Okay. There we go. Sorry about that. Once again, Bill has been so kind as to introduce me from the Maryland Department of Commerce. So I am the Director of Cybersecurity and Aerospace. And in my role, I work with different commercial, government, and academic institutions and entities across the state of Maryland. And lucky for us, I also have the opportunity to work with many global or international companies as well on behalf of the state. So it's very exciting and interesting to find out always what's going on in the world of cybersecurity. But let's talk about cybersecurity. Let's talk about really what this is. One of the questions that I think I always hear is, who needs cybersecurity? We tend to think of certain people or certain companies or businesses that really need the cybersecurity. Of course, we think of large businesses, right? They always need cybersecurity. You think of the big financial institutions, your big healthcare institutions, right? We're always hearing in the news, healthcare, this hospital was hacked and all their money was taken, and they had to pay an exorbitant fee in order to get their money back, and in order to get their data back, because we want to make sure we protect our data. We talk about financial institutions, right? And we talk about manufacturing businesses. We talk about energy companies, right? Everybody remembers the Colonial Pipeline, even though the pipeline was shut down because of an attack. They actually didn't attack the pipeline itself, but still, it's something that's extremely important to us. We talk about ICS and OT, the industrial controls, and we also talk about operational technology in terms of cybersecurity. So we really kind of focus everything in all of our efforts, and in the news, we hear a great deal about large businesses. We also talk about medium businesses as well, not so much in terms of cyber, but typically these two entities, these two sectors are able to handle cybersecurity. Maybe they might have a team that maybe they might have a CISO hopefully on their board. They might have somebody in their IT department that's working on or that focuses on cybersecurity and providing the resources that's necessary. So think about that. They have the money, the time, the resources to really throw at cybersecurity and making sure that the data within their business is protected and they have a strong security posture. But I wanted to focus on small businesses and what does that look like for those small businesses. They don't even realize sometimes that they really need cybersecurity. They think that they're never going to get attacked. And so many times I speak with small businesses. I work with a great deal of many startups, many small businesses in a variety of sectors. Tech is my sector, but I tend to go out and speak with these different businesses and find out really why aren't they utilizing cybersecurity? What are the barriers to cybersecurity, and how we at the Maryland Department of Commerce can help them strengthen their business, because really we're about economic advantages for everybody in the state of Maryland. What's good for the companies, hopefully then it provides employment. It's good for our citizens in Maryland. So really we want to make sure that we continue to build strong businesses all the way around. So with these small businesses though, they tend to think that cybersecurity is a want. They don't really think of it as a need, they think of it as a want. And I think that's really important to change that perspective on cybersecurity in terms of these small businesses. And so I'm going to address this right off. I see that I've got small business attack surface. I should probably put small business attack vectors, because these things are really how the data is being affected, or the types of attacks that we're seeing to actually get to the data. Maybe not necessarily the surface or the area where the vulnerabilities are in the network or within the organization. So, but people use these terms interchangeably. So we're just going to leave it at surface at this point. So one of the things that small businesses say to me is, I'm never going to get attacked. Nobody ever comes looking for me. How are they possibly going to get in? I have one computer in the back. I have points of service. I have my credit card stuff. I'm fine. Well, one of the things they don't think about is the supply chain attacks that occur. And I think that is something that we talk about in terms of defense. We talk about it in large businesses. We talk about, the CMMC thing that's going on in terms of federal contractors, but we really don't think about it in small businesses. So, who is putting in, or who are you buying your resources from in order to supply your business? Are there manufacturers that are involved in, creating the widgets that you're supplying in your retail store, right? Are you looking at maybe in the food industry, in sometimes in farms, there's a dairy that's up the street from me, and we think about the data that's being supplied through in order to get the right amount of feed, in order to get the right amount of resources that they need to keep that dairy farm going. Maybe even think about to the grocery store itself, or to the small mom and pop retail stores. You need to think about where they're getting the orders from, and et cetera, et cetera. So supply chain attacks are very very important, and it's something that these small businesses need to think about as well. We'll also talk about ransomware. Ransomware is very popular now. I'm sure everybody has heard about ransomware, and of course, it's the opportunity, or it's the way attackers will put out, they'll take data and they'll hold it hostage, essentially, and they'll ask the business or the company to provide funds to them, either electronically, maybe through Bitcoin or something along those lines, or really just make some kind of deposit into their account that is obviously secret squirrel stuff and nobody can find them, so if they're smart. So we think of it in large terms. We think of it, as I said in the beginning, the hospitals, they're asked for ransomware, but also ransomware affects our small businesses as well. It may not be something that we talk about, and maybe they don't even want to talk about it, but if they get their data taken from them, they have, what do they have? They've got credit card information. Maybe if it's a doctor's office, they have patient information, healthcare information. This is all information that we do not want out into the internet. We do not want hackers to have this. So what do? We have to put certain controls in place to make sure that that doesn't occur. But as I was saying, for the small business, maybe they don't think that they are going to be attacked in this particular way. So we need to make sure that in terms of ransomware, that they are protected. So let's move on to pivot and attack. So with pivot and attack, I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with this, but basically all this means is the IT system, maybe the server that's sitting in the back of the mechanics in that small business, somebody could actually get into their server, maybe through the web or something else, and then utilize their server or their any of their anything on their network to go ahead and pivot or do the attack through their particular systems. So they may not even know that they're being used, kind of like a proxy at this point. And many people don't realize it when you think about DDoS attacks or distributed denials of service. It's not all coming from one entity. They can go out and use these computers and draw in and make them bots, and they can do a command and control and take over. So, and then sometimes people are just using their, just using them as a pass-through to implement attacks and whatnot into from these servers. So the mechanic doesn't even have any idea that that's actually going on, and not to his fault. He's just not, he doesn't have the protections in place, or he doesn't have the knowledge to understand that that could occur, right? And so last, of course, is social engineering. And of course, people can get information through this. It's a great vector to you can do it through the phone. Maybe you call up the doctor's office and you're trying to get information on with a patient and whatnot. So or you're trying to get up information, credit cards, anything along those lines. And it can work with a variety of small businesses. They fall prey to it because they just don't understand the signs. So sometimes awareness is one of the best things that we can offer them in order to help keep their business safe. So what are the barriers, though, for small business? We've talked about these attack vectors, but what are the barriers? There are always two things. There's cost and there's knowledge. In my experience going out and dealing with these small businesses and chatting with them, they always say to me, I'd love to have cybersecurity, but you know what? I just can't afford it. It's so expensive. I can't afford a cybersecurity consultant to come in here, and spend thousands of dollars and implement software that costs me money, pay a monthly subscription fee, understand that, come in and maybe put in a firewall, just basic things to keep them safe, to move them up so that they're no longer the lowest hanging fruit. So we think about cost. So I took that into account as well when I talk about small businesses. And then there's the knowledge piece. They don't know what they don't know. And they're wonderful at their jobs, and that's their strength. If you're a doctor's office or a CPA firm or consulting office, or maybe you do PR, or you're, you run a retail store, you run anything, small manufacturing, and they're maybe making pieces that go into a larger product. all these specific entities, they don't understand that they are important and they are valuable and they are prone to the attacks that I just listed. And I find that sometimes when I deal with these smaller businesses, they usually say, well, I had cousin Jimmy who lives up the street come in and set up the Wi-Fi. He was back from spring break and I have my small business. So, I said, hey, you're an IT guy. Can you come in and set this up for me? And he went in and set it up. And the owner of the business has no clue how things are set up. They don't understand what the vulnerabilities are. They don't understand that things maybe weren't set up correctly, although cousin Jimmy did his best. We're not going to say anything, but cousin Jimmy probably did not come in and make an assessment of the assets and probably did not do maybe set things up correctly. We don't know what he did with everything. So it's really important to have professionals come out and really address these types of concerns to make sure that your data is safe, that the data is safe in these small businesses. So that's always extremely important to look at. So let's talk about accessibility for these small businesses in terms of cybersecurity. So we were very lucky in the state of Maryland to apply for a grant, and it is through it is through SBA, the Small Business Administration. It is a federal agency or federal grant that we won. It was for cybersecurity and to provide small businesses with cybersecurity resources and training. We developed a pilot program, and our pilot program is called Small Business Cybersecurity Resilience in Maryland. And honestly, I can't remember all that all the time. So I typically have to just call it the SCRIM program. So I know you need another acronym, like you need a hole in the head in cybersecurity, but in our realm, we call it SCRIM. So much easier. We were one of 3 awardees to receive this grant. It's close to $1 million that we received. We received it in August, and we've been implementing these different pieces to this pilot program that we developed to help cybersecurity, to help improve the cybersecurity posture for these small businesses. We have 3 different components to this. Now, let me remind you, this is a pilot program. So we had certain requirements, we had certain components that we were addressing. So we have an assessment portion. We wanted our participants to be able to have an assessment, a general assessment of what's going on, what's their devices, what does it look like within their environment, because many times they don't even know. Cousin Jimmy set up the server or the Wi-Fi access point, or a salesman came in and sold them point of service devices, whatever the case may be. They just don't quite understand what's going on and what they have in their network. And maybe they do, and that's great too. Maybe they have we were established and here's what we've got. Sometimes they pull out different network structures and everything. And you have to look at them and you're like, well, how does all this run and what's going on? And so it's a very interesting thing. So with this SCRIM program, we thought it'd be very important for an assessment phase. In addition to assessment phase, we're also offering training as well. We at Commerce are not providing the training. We're actually working with one of our partners, SBDC, which is, it's the Maryland chapter. So the Small Business Development Center, the Maryland branch of that, and they are part of SBA overall, and they are providing general cyber hygiene training to every company, all the participants, and all the individuals within this particular within the business. And then they're going to provide training to specifically based on the industry for everyone within that company that is responsible for the cybersecurity. So it might be the owner, it might be his IT guy, and the owner, it might be, whoever that may be, that's really needs to be conscientious of the cybersecurity posture and maintain that even as we leave. So the other part to this program is also the mitigation. The mitigation part was essential, that we would go in and not only assess them, find out what the vulnerabilities are, have a vulnerability report, but then also at the end address those vulnerabilities. I called it mitigation, it's mitigation remediation. And then also it was extremely important to make sure that they have a continuing business plan in terms of cybersecurity. It was never our intent to go in, drop an assessment, give them some training, remediate some of their issues, implement, let's say, antivirus or firewall, and be like, see ya, good luck, peace out. That was not the plan. The plan is then always that they will have a way to continue to implement any of the changes that were made, because the overarching goal is to make them secure and make sure they are not the lowest hanging fruit. So those were the three components of the particular SCRIM program that we've addressed. Now, in doing so with the SCRIM program, we also are working, the Maryland Department of Commerce, we are working with CAMI. And of course, I mentioned we're working with SBDC. So CAMI is the Cybersecurity Association of Maryland. We work hand in hand with them. They are a group, an organization that welcomes and that is made up of many of, or basically all the commercial entities who deal with cyber in Maryland, as well as additional satellite or branch organizations that deal with cybersecurity, such as maybe law firms or CPA firms or insurance, et cetera, within our area. So CAMI is one of our partners, and then also SBDC, as I said, is providing the training as well for our SCRIM program. So then you say to yourself, well, if you're offering cybersecurity services, how are you selecting these businesses? Well, originally we were looking at 40 businesses to provide, and we were splitting up the cost that we received. It was almost $1 million, close to $1 million. And so we said, if we did that for 40 businesses, let's split it up. We have fixed prices. So for the assessment services, we said, well, we can offer $9,500 towards assessment services. For the mitigation services, we're looking at a fixed price of $10,000 for mitigation, remediation services and resources. So we split that money up for each individual participant. So they knew coming in that they would get assessment services they didn't have to pay for, they would get mitigation services they didn't have to pay for, and also we allocated money to training as well. So for our participant in this program, a small business, they do not have to pay for anything unless they would like to continue on with additional services that we are not, that they wish to continue a subscription or whatnot, and they have it with their budget, then that's perfectly up to them to continue those. So we're very excited then that we put this out there publicly, and we asked an application process to occur, and we had SBDC headed up the application process. We asked companies, they had to be a small business, 50 employees or fewer. They had to be within the following, they had to be within retail, restaurant, finance, healthcare, or manufacturing. So they had 5 industries or 5 sectors that we were really focusing on, because remember, it's pilot program. And so we were trying to kind of develop this around maybe the particular industries that we felt really needed the most cybersecurity assistance and support at this point. With the stage of business, we really wanted them to have some revenues already, or some products and services. So really, we weren't looking at pre-revenues or startups. So that was and then we also wanted the company to have, to make sure that they were willing to put their employees through the cybersecurity training, that they would also be able to, at some point, demonstrate a basic level of knowledge. They had to pass it's not a test necessarily, we're calling it a test, but just to make sure that they've mastered or they understand the concepts. It's sort of like that security awareness training you get every month and maybe through a larger business, but just to ensure that they understood the material that was being conveyed to them regarding cybersecurity. What does a phishing email look like? What are the signs of that you're being socially engineered? Things along those lines. Why is it necessary to have maybe multi-factor authentication? Whatever the case may be, we wanted to make sure that they were willing to have their employees do that. So we went through the entire process. We got many, many applications, more than we thought we would. It was very exciting, and with the applicants, we ended up with 35. And I do get that question is, well, why only 35? Well, when we went through, we wanted to make sure that we allocated the funds to the participants or to the businesses that really needed those cybersecurity services. And so I will say we had a variety of businesses and sectors, and some of them did not meet the requirements in terms of size, or maybe they weren't in one of those 5 sectors. Also, there was cost involved. If you were a very large company and you already had an IT department and it was well funded, you were not necessarily going to be on our list. So we were very strategic about who we selected. And at the end, we ended up with 35 businesses, small businesses within the state of Maryland, and they met all the qualifications. So we had that established and that was done. But our next task was, what are we going to do? How are we going to provide the training and services? So I already expressed that we are providing assessment services, and we're providing mitigation remediation services. So I wanted to make sure that this really spoke to helping to do a win-win situation within the state of Maryland. We put out an RFP, a request for proposals. We did 2 separate ones, one for assessment services and one for, we called it scanning and mitigate, or one for mitigation remediation services. We gave the contractors, it was posted on Emma. It was put out through various social media sites, and we asked them to apply to be contractors and provide these services to these small businesses. We had an overwhelming amount. We had a number of companies, cyber companies, that had that actually provided wonderful proposals. We were able to cut that down through an evaluation process among 3 people who are part of the proposal committee. So we selected 5 businesses for assessment services, to provide assessment services to our small businesses. And we selected 5 companies to provide the mitigation remediation services to the small companies. So, it gave us an opportunity to really look at who can provide those services and who would represent the state and go through a validation period and be able to do a good job and ensure that our companies are up to snuff with that. So we are excited about that. And at this point, we're looking at implementing those in the next month or so. We also have the SBDC contractors. They are being SBDC, they're doing the training portion. And we have a training manager that's going to manage that. And I also was remiss in the industry vendors. We have a direct services manager from our CAMI partner who is going to make sure to coordinate all the timing and the scheduling over the next couple of months between our vendors and our participants. So our program is very well established at this point. Currently, we've got our participants selected, we've got our vendors selected. Things move a bit slow for the procurement process with government on both federal and state level. So we've been doing our best to push this through. We have approval in process right now. I'm very excited to say that. I'm looking forward to having these services and resources available to the small businesses in the state and really to implement this small business program. It will occur over the summer into the fall. And my goal, honestly, as from Commerce, from the state, is to continue this type of program, come back, look at what has occurred, make any revisions through the state, through the program itself, and continue to hopefully offer services and support and resources to these small businesses. Because right now we only have 35, of course, based on this, but there are many, many, many more small businesses across the state of Maryland that are in desperate need of cybersecurity. So through awareness, through promotion, through hopefully the success of this program, as we're seeing it, I would like to see this program expand and move forward and be something that's established within the state on a more permanent basis, is my goal. So I know that was as fast as I could to go through this. I'd like to know what questions you have. I am more than happy to answer anything you need. Our SCRIM program is in full swing right now. We're here to address and be part of the cyber community and really help the small businesses boost their cyber posture or establish a cyber posture in some cases, and be part of the overall and contribute to the overall success of Maryland. So I have questions, and I know Bill. Hello.
Sure. I'm just making sure that I was unmuted and had the video on. Okay, right now there's just one question from George, but before we go into that, I want to just let you know that everybody listening today, that if you have a question or a comment, doesn't always have to be a question, a comment about this, feel free to put it into the text chat and we'll be happy to discuss it. We have plenty of time to do that. But let's start with the first question from George. It says, it is even possible to provide cybersecurity with only open source software? Great question, George. Even free firewalls require extensive engineering up front.
Exactly. And you know what, George, I understand. Yes. You know what? And that comes back to the cost and the knowledge barriers. And I think that in a cost perspective, that sounds great. But I have Linux. I taught it. I enjoy it. I think open source community is imperative to our cyber community. With these businesses, it would be a great idea to have open source, and some of the vendors can use open source, but they are going to need the support to implement the open source. So they're going to need that knowledge piece as well. And I think that's where the vendors come in, or not just to ensure that it's done properly and ensure that it's maintained as well. So I think open source is a wonderful way, and it gives you a great opportunity, but that doesn't always necessarily have all the support for these particular small businesses who really need some guidance. And I think it's great for those in the cyber community to reach out and support them. So yes, I'm a big proponent of open source. If you've got if you're in that community, it's great, it's wonderful. But for these small businesses, I think we can do it in conjunction with open source. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Tom, who is dialing in all the way from Croatia in Europe, asks this question. What are, you touched on this a little bit, but I think he wants you to go a little bit deeper dive. What are the specific cybersecurity needs and challenges faced by small businesses, and what measures can they implement to protect their sensitive data and systems effectively?
Right. No, I thank you, Tom. Yes. So let's take that in two parts. So the first part was really, what are the challenges they're seeing? And I think part of it is that they're just vulnerable, and they don't realize that they're vulnerable. They think well, I'm nobody's going to get to me. Nobody is going to try to hack in. What do I have? What kind of data do I have? Well, you have very sensitive. If you have a credit card machine, you have data. If you have a server in the back, you've got data. Anything can be important. Any kind of data is important. So how are you vulnerable? In the beginning, I talked a little bit about some of the attack vectors that are possible. I mean, think about it. If you're if your business is being utilized as a proxy, the small business could be, used as a bot and as a pass-through for, illegal or, immoral situations, criminal things, and you don't even know what's going on. Also think about if they can, if an attacker is able to get into your system and start exfiltrating stuff, that's it could be your data. And the problem is that for a small business, it's difficult to recover from an attack. If it's a ransomware attack and they've got their data hostage, asking a small business to pay even $10,000 is, can cripple them, and not to mention their reputation as well. If they're in the community and they're working as a CPA firm or a dentist or anything, suddenly I don't feel safe going there anymore. You've got my medical history, you have my credit card data, you have all my PII, and then that's attacked and that's taken. What recourse do these people really have? And that's another thing I didn't really have a chance to address is, what do they do? What does the small business do at that point once they've been attacked? So what can they do? I know one of the things we did was the SCRIM program, which I went through. We're trying to offer assessment, we're trying to offer training, we're trying to offer mitigation to really help them establish that posture. If somebody is comfortable with technology within the business, or they've got somebody that maybe they've got an IT firm that they work with, and they're on maybe on a retainer, or, then those type of people will be able to implement antivirus. They'll be able to implement maybe some monthly training if that helps, because I think training is essential, awareness training, not necessarily technical training, but how do you get attacked? What are the vectors? What's the surface look like? Where's the different pieces that could affect the likelihood of an attack. So there are ways to implement things. My only thing about this, Tom, is who is doing the implementing? Do you feel comfortable with them implementing it? Because if it's cousin Jimmy and he's great and he's family and he's wonderful and he's probably very smart, but maybe he, on that router, or even on that Wi-Fi, on that access point, if you don't reset the admin password in the admin account, you're vulnerable, you're open to it. So I think we just want to make sure that we have somebody that is a professional, at least come in, take a look, make sure that, you've done everything possible to be proactive. You do not want to be stuck in attack later and be reactive and trying to go in and fix things that have been damaged already. We see that a great deal. We hear about it in large entities. We hear about it in some medium size, but the small ones we don't hear about, because if they're attacked, unfortunately, most of the time they have to go out of business because they just can't afford to recover from that. So that's what we're finding, at least.
Thank you. George asked this question: what would be the minimal cybersecurity cost for Apple, Windows, or Linux setup? I'm guessing $25,000 and a yearly $5K for updates.
Oh, okay. So here's the tricky thing with cost. If you're setting up an entire, it depends on which stage you're in. And I'm not trying to be vague. I'm just trying to be open about it. I do get asked that question a lot, and I'll have to be honest. I know the fixed prices that we set up for the state of Maryland, like $9,500 for an assessment and $10,000 for mitigation. I realize I'm in the cyber community. I come from that world. It is not a lot of money. Okay. And it's some companies are like, I don't think I could, do an assessment or mitigation for that cost. So yeah, you are looking at a pretty good chunk of change to implement those types of things. And I know you were talking about Windows, you're talking about Linux, any of those types of things to set up. If you're going with the large players, then, and this is why I guess I was saying it's important to maybe get a professional on board to help you evaluate the cost, because not every company is going to require the same thing. Not every industry requires the same type of devices and equipment. And I think you really need somebody to see what really gives you the lowest risk versus the cost. So if it's a high risk, then you probably need to put the money in order to protect that. Maybe if you're a CPA firm or a law firm or whatever. I mean, think about if you're a law firm, what kind of data you have, people's criminal records, PII, it could be their medical data. You really want to make sure you have a very strong cybersecurity posture in place, and maybe the risk is a lot higher for you. So, so it's sort of a variable question. And yes, it does take some money to make sure that you're secure. But at the same time, you have to look at the risks. There has to be something in place, and putting some antivirus on something is just the first step. I mean, even as small, I mean, if you built a house and you put locks on the door, it's not going to cost as much. It costs something, but at least you've done something to protect the house. Now, if you go in and they get through your attacks, or, you get through the front door, maybe, and the locks, then, maybe you've got a safe with your money in it and all that. And it takes a little bit more for them to get through that, other than just putting the cash under your mattress or wherever you might keep it. So the more layers you want to put on, the higher the risk might be for you. I think you're going to have to put more money into it. And that's just the fact. And that's just being very blunt. So, which is why I think it's really important and imperative for the small businesses to have the resources, and for it to be something that does not make it impossible for them to have some type of proactive approach.
I wanted to jump in here again to answer, bounce ahead to a question that Aslak asked: is this recording or live? And we are recording the session, and I'll talk a little bit about how to get a certificate of participation, whether you're on demand or recording, but it is being recorded. I want to come back here to a second follow-up question that George asks. It says, do most small businesses go to the cloud?
Oh, George, nice, nice. Yes. So, and when we think of the cloud, I think it's kind of funny because, so when you think about small businesses, you think about they're focused on whatever their business is, whether it's financing, accounting, retail, medical, healthcare, whatever it might be. Some of them are pretty comfortable with technology and they might wish to move to the cloud. Some of them have no idea what the cloud is, and they think literally that they're putting it out there somewhere in the netherworld, in cyberspace, and they don't really realize that it's just going on somebody else's server, in another area. So that question really depends on how much knowledge they know for the small business. Having said that, sometimes it becomes a cost factor. The cloud is popular, yes. We all use it at some point. If it makes sense for them to keep their data on the cloud, that's an option. Maybe they're going to use one of the big providers out there. Maybe they're already on using the cloud. So then it becomes, what does the security look like for them? And that might be different than just if they have a server in the back. Do I see a movement towards cloud? I think it's the same as within any industry. We're seeing people go to the cloud, they move to the cloud, put all their data there, and that might be the right decision for that business. Because then in the cloud, in that particular, you have to look at the agreements, obviously, with the provider and see if they provide the security or you're comfortable with the security that they're providing at that particular level. So I hate, like I said, I hate to be vague. That's certainly not what I'm doing. But we do see some movement into the cloud. But with small businesses, I think less, because they tend to operate on a smaller budget, and sometimes they can't afford it, or sometimes they're not comfortable with having their data somewhere else. So it depends on the company itself.
Thank you, Kim. I'm going to bounce in here and ask a question of my own, just simply because now you've got me curious.
No problem.
As a customer, I obviously have a dentist. I have someone who helps with the taxes. I have a lawyer, those kinds of things. Not that I need a lawyer very much, but I have one for my will. At any rate, do I have a right as a customer to actually ask my dentist, for example, or my doctor's office, what kind of cyber defense do they have, or how safe is my PPI?
Yes, you do. And many people do not ask that question. And but you do have the right as an individual to know how your data is being utilized and if it's being protected. Unfortunately, sometimes they're like, I don't know. The nice person at the front desk may have no idea what you're talking about and be like, I don't know, we just type it in and here it is. So they may, and they're like, what's your name again? They just want to know you're here, checked off, and send your chart somewhere. But yes, you do have a right to know that. We all have a right to know what's going on with our data at this point. And in fact, every time you go on the website, they're like, I agree to have this company track this, or I agree that they can have my cookies, not the chocolate chip kind, I always have to say, unfortunately, but they have to agree. You have to agree that they're of what's going to happen to your data. And so it's the same thing in a small business. I will say though, you may not get an answer straight away. It depends how aware the individuals working there are. And so part of the SCRIM program is to offer that training, so hopefully everybody's aware, and that's what's important. We need to raise the cybersecurity IQ of everybody, because everybody is affected by cybersecurity. We are in a global digital society. And so everything we do is there. Everything is out there for anybody.
Thank you. I'm going to take this final question from Tom, and then we'll wrap it up and move on to the conclusion of the webinar. Tom asks, what are the tangible benefits that a small business can expect to gain from investing in a risk assessment before allocating resources to cybersecurity initiatives?
I like that. And you know what? I think that's a very logical step to do. And part of when we developed the pilot program, I think it definitely gives you a jumping off point, because how are you going to, or why would you go out and spend money on a certain firewall or spend money on a certain antivirus or whatever the case may be, whatever the, or training or anything, if you don't even have an overall view of what's going on within your business. So having that risk assessment or having that general assessment, it gives you access to everything that's going on with your environment. You have a firm overview of how your structure, how your networking, your structure, your critical infrastructure is set up. That's so imperative, right? It's like a 30,000-foot view. And then I think as in terms of business, then you can figure out what's the highest risk, what do I need to address? Because when you do an assessment, one of the things they're going to do is provide a report to you. And within that report, they're going to break down the vulnerabilities. And they're also going to say to you, this is, if they do it right, they're going to say, this is a low risk, this is medium risk, this is high risk. And you want to focus on the high risk, right? You want to say, this is what I'm most vulnerable, this is most likely going to get me attacked. So those are the resources then that you want to put, or those are the resources those are the vulnerabilities that you want to put your resources towards. Hence, it's the most cost beneficial thing for you to do for your company. Otherwise, you're basically shooting in the dark. And so, yes, a risk or the assessment is an extremely important part of this. And even if you decide not to do something with it, or you find that it's, we've got a lot of we've got a lot of low risk vulnerabilities and whatnot, maybe you don't do anything with it necessarily, but it's always good, at least I would, in my perspective and in my experience, it's always good to at least get an assessment maybe once a year, evaluate where you are, and then maybe if needs change, your customer base changes, anything changes, then you can always update, your resources and in terms of anything from business to cybersecurity. So,
kind of a yearly cyber health checkup.
yes.
I said it would be the last question, but I wanted to give a shout out to Aslak, who's joined us. I didn't think you'd be able to. He's dialing in from Oslo, Norway. And he said, are there international rules? I think I'd like to expand that question by saying, are some of the principles that you're discovering working with small business, would they apply across the board in any country?
So the answer to that is yes and no. And so, for instance, in England, the GDPR is in the UK. And so it really has to do with sovereignty and rules and whatnot. So if there's a UK citizen and they come to the United States, and you're dealing with them and we have to be beholden to those rules dealing with GDPR and their privacy and what they can be. So answering those kinds of questions, how we handle their data, so we have to respect that, unless of course they say it's fine and you can use my data, unless they sign, give permission once again to, so you can use my data however you would like. But when we go to England necessarily, we go to the UK, we don't necessarily are covered under GDPR, because that's not we're not beholden to that in the United States. In the United States, I know that they're making a number of rules, a number of regulations to go ahead and address the privacy issues. In fact, the state of Maryland, in the past year, we made an officer of data privacy one of our in our CISO role in our Office of Security Management. So we have an officer that handles data and an officer that handles privacy. So it is a huge issue to make sure that that's the case. So it's the same kind of thing. I think wherever your data is held is the rules for that apply to that region, their privacy rules. So if my data is being held in China, then my data is subjected to the rules in China. It depends on this. It's a sovereignty rule. If my data is being held in Norway or the Netherlands or France or wherever, my data is then subjected to their privacy rules. So that's why when you ask about small businesses and cloud, or any business for that matter, if you're looking at cloud, you're looking at holding your data somewhere in a data center, you better make sure where that data center is located and that you agree to the security policies within that country. And that's something I think a lot of people don't realize, that that's the case, because you are subject to whatever the rules are for that country.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And we're going to move on now because I'm watching the clock here. This is Kimberly's email address. If you need to do a screenshot of that or write it down, that'd be a great idea. I'm sure she'll follow up any other questions that you might have. Now, we have just one more webinar left in this academic year. It's called Networking Excellence, Building a Strong Value-Based Network in an Accelerating and Digital World, with Dr. David Olivencia, who's actually literally written a book on the subject. Now, this is not networking like plugging wires together. This is networking like dealing with other people. And how do you do that successfully in a digital environment? So back in the day when you would go to some kind of business mixer and hand out all your business cards, now it's all digital. And how was that going to work? It'll be a very fascinating and interesting presentation. In order to sign up for that, of course, go to our captechu.edu/webinar-series. Now, I do want to mention, since that is our last session for this year, then we'll take a break in July and August and begin in September. If you have a topic or a presenter that you would like to recommend to us for the 2023-24 academic year webinar series, let us know. We'll be happy to follow up on that. We're always interested in pursuing what our listeners are interested in hearing about. Now, I do want to mention, I mentioned this in passing, we hold master's and doctoral virtual information sessions every month. The doctoral will be actually this coming Sunday, and the master's a week from yesterday, next Wednesday. If you're interested in either of those and would like to be on the registration list, just email this email address and we'll be happy to add you to that. And again, some would be interested in that, some would not, but we want you to be aware of it. And then the last slide that I want to talk about here is we offer certificates of completion for all of our webinars, including this one. If you would like to get that, I'll be sending out an email to all registrants with a link to the recording, a link to the slides, and the invitation to get a certificate. If you would like to have one, just simply reply to that email. I'll be happy to provide that to you. Now, with that, we are done. It concludes the webinar. I'd like to thank our presenter again, Kimberly Mentzell, for a wonderful presentation. It's been very helpful, and I know you've taken out time from your conference to be within the webinar, and I appreciate that as well. So thank you very much, and thank you to all who have joined us. Look for that email. It'll come out later today or first thing in the morning. With that, we are done, and you may log off. And thank you, Kimberly, for everything that you've done today.